One of the most talked about topics this offseason for the Green Bay Packers is which wide receiver will lead the Packers in receiving yards. A room full of talent that you could argue has a lot of number 2 wide receivers and not a true number 1 wide receiver. But in my opinion, that doesn't matter. But it's still an interesting thought. Who will actually come out on top of this Green Bay Packers wide receiver room? You could sit here and say any one of the top 4 wide receivers, and you'd have an argument. So in today's video, brought to you by BetUS, we're going to go ahead and predict the receiving stats for every wide receiver plus tight ends on the Green Bay Packers roster for 2024. With just 3 days until Green Bay Packers kick off Friday night in Brazil versus the Philadelphia Eagles, if you guys have been a part of my channel, you know there's certain wide receivers in this room that I'm extremely high on. So I wanted to make a video to get my predictions down for this wide receiver room, so then we can take a look at them after this season is concluded. If you happen to be a new viewer, I'd highly suggest going down and clicking that subscribe button if you want to stay in the loop with everything Green Bay Packers, from game live streams, injury updates, to PFF reviews after the game and game reactions. You'll find it all here on this channel. We go live Friday night for Packers versus Eagles week 1. I am so excited. All right, guys, before we get into the stat predictions, I wanted to give a massive shout out to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. They are a proud partner of this channel, and right now they are offering a great promotion. Get a 125% deposit match on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000 with the link down in the description or the one pinned in the comments. The game props are already out for the Packers versus Eagles game, and I'm sure the player props will be out very, very soon. And you can bet on things such as the first scoring play of the game, total touchdowns, total field goals. You can also pick your anytime touchdown scorers. Josh Jacobs at plus 105, Jayden Reed plus 185. You could even go with someone like Dontayvion Wicks at plus 350. You guys know how high I am on Dontayvion Wicks. The point of today's video is to talk about wide receivers, so I'm going to place a wide receiver bet, and that is Dontayvion Wicks scoring a touchdown in week 1 versus the Philadelphia Eagles. If you bet $25, you can win an additional $87.50. You guys can tail my bet or take a look at all the other lines that BetUS has to offer. There are plenty of them. Again, you can get a 125% deposit match on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000 on BetUS with the link down below. All right, so now back to the video. So first, let's get a little bit of a refresher of how the wide receivers did in 2023, who led the Green Bay Packers. So that was Jayden Reed. He had 64 receptions for 793 yards and 8 touchdowns. So a single Packers wide receiver didn't get over 800 yards in 2023. I think that's 100% going to change. And as you'll see by my predictions, I think 2 receivers actually get over 1,000 yards in 2024. The Packers offense started slow. Jordan Love started slow. I think they're going to come out firing, and I think every receiver in this room is only going to get better. Romeo Doubs was second on that list with 17 games played. Obviously, Mr. Consistency, this guy is always available. 674 yards on 59 receptions and also 8 touchdowns. Dontayvion Wicks was the 3rd wide receiver in terms of yards. He played in 15 games but only started in 6, but still had 581 yards on 39 targets and 4 touchdowns. That's super impressive considering he only started in 6 games. Christian Watson was 4th. Obviously, the plethora of injuries last year. The big question here is, can he stay healthy? He's definitely the biggest wild card, the biggest question mark. He had 28 receptions, 422 yards, 5 touchdowns, and that was in 9 games. As for tight ends, they were the next 2 in terms of receiving yards, and Tucker Kraft was the slight leader over Luke Musgrave. He played in 17 games, but only started in 8. Obviously started to get more snaps when Luke Musgrave had that injury. He had 31 receptions, 355 yards, 2 touchdowns. Luke Musgrave played in 11 games, started in 9, had 34 receptions for 352 yards, so only 3 yards less than Tucker Kraft, and 1 touchdown. Then to round things out, 2 more receivers on this list. Obviously the Packers' 5th and 6th wide receivers, Bo Melton, Malik Heath, the same that it is right now. Bo Melton played in 5 games, only started in 1, but had 218 yards on 16 receptions and a touchdown. Malik Heath played in 13 games, only started in 1. I believe it was that New York Giants game, mainly was a special teamer, but did see some snaps, had 15 receptions, 125 yards, and 1 touchdowns. Now, that totaled out to 3,520 yards out of Jordan Love's total 4,159 yards. Obviously, there are some players on that list that are no longer on the team or aren't going to be playing this year. Aaron Jones, now with the Vikings, A.J. Dillon on IR, Samori Toure on the Bears practice squad, DeGuara, I honestly don't know, probably a free agent. But then, of course, there's new players that will replace that yardage. Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, and Emmanuel Wilson. We could throw Ben Sims in there, but he only had 4 receptions for 21 yards last season, so I'm not really accounting him into this. I'm mainly going over the top 6 wide receivers and the top 2 tight ends in today's prediction. All right, so now that we went over the wide receiver stats from last season, let's get this prediction started. And like I said, I don't think there's any way that the Packers don't have a receiver over 800 yards like they did last year. I'm very high on this season. I'm very high on Jordan Love in 2024, and I think he's going to have an MVP caliber performance, which means his receivers are also going to match that with the yardage, with the touchdowns. So for the number 1 wide receiver in terms of yardage at the end of the season, I have Romeo Doubs. And you might be sitting here going, wow, I fully expected him to say Dontayvion Wicks, which you're correct. I do have high hopes for Dontayvion Wicks, and I think he can become a true number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, but will that happen right away in 2024? I think he's going to see a lot of snaps. I think he's going to see a lot of receptions. But one thing is clear, Romeo Doubs is consistent, and Romeo Doubs is a main target for Jordan Love. He was last year. He was all of training camp. And plain and simple, this guy is consistent. He's healthy. He goes out there and he makes plays every single game. His best game definitely in that playoff game against the Dallas Cowboys, where he completely torched that defense. Some of the routes he was running that day were just beautiful. So I have Romeo Doubs not only topping 1,000 yards, but also topping 100 receptions. I have him getting 103 receptions for 1,157 yards and 9 touchdowns. A lot of people are extremely high on Romeo Doubs this season. A lot of people are saying this guy is criminally underrated, and you see why. Some of the plays he makes in practice, it feels like him and Jordan Love had that same connection that Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson had, where they kind of know where each other are at all times. They can throw a ball to a spot before Doubs breaks to it, and Love knows that Doubs will be at that point to make the grab. It seems like any crucial play or a red zone 3rd down or a goal line 3rd down, you can almost guarantee that Jordan Love's going to be looking Romeo Doubs' way. He's all around a great wide receiver. When it comes to route running, his strong hands, he's not going to wow you in any of those categories, but he simply knows how to make plays, and he simply shows up every game and is consistent. So that's why I have Romeo Doubs as the leading wide receiver for 2024 in terms of yardage. Number 2 on this list is Dontayvion Wicks, and I also have him as a 1,000-yard wide receiver, but not as much as Romeo Doubs. I have him only getting 74 receptions, so not topping the 100 reception mark, but 1,025 yards and 6 touchdowns. I thought it was a super impressive rookie campaign from Dontayvion Wicks, who only started in 6 games. I mean, only starting in 6 games and nearly getting 600 yards is almost 100 yards every time you start a game. It's very impressive. He also dealt with some injuries last year. I think he's going to be a lot healthier this year. I think the Packers wide receiver room as a whole is going to be a lot healthier. I mean, this team as a whole seems like it's going to be a lot healthier. During practice this week so far, everyone has been practicing. The 53-man roster as well as the 17-man practice squad. The injury report should be out a little later today. That'll also be a video on my channel, so be on the lookout for that. But I think a lot of these guys are going to be healthier this season. And Dontayvion Wicks, I think, easily could surpass 1,000 yards in year 2. He has that much talent, in my opinion. He's already becoming one of the best route runners in the NFL. This guy is always open, and he can make very, very impressive contested catches. So I have the Packers having 2 1,000-yard receivers in 2024, Romeo Doubs and Dontayvion Wicks. Next on this list, I have Jayden Reed getting a slight upgrade from his rookie campaign where he saw just under 800 yards. I have him topping 800 yards here in his sophomore season, 65 receptions, 857 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Now, the only reason I don't have Jayden Reed as the other 1,000-yard receiver over Dontayvion Wicks is they're going to utilize him in the running game a lot. So he's going to get rushing yards as well. Scrimmage yards, yeah, he could top 1,000 yards for sure. But I think in terms of just a wide receiver, I'm not sure year 2 is the year that Jayden Reed's going to top 1,000 yards. Not saying he won't in the future because this guy has so much skill. And this list is honestly super difficult to create. Like, it's really hard to pick who's 1 through 4. Like, you could rearrange this any way and you could be right or you could be wrong. Like, You could say it's the complete opposite once I'm done with this list in terms of the top 4, and you 100% could be right. This is just my prediction. Jayden Reed, 65 receptions, 857 yards, 8 touchdowns. The next player is Christian Watson. Now, I love Christian Watson, and what he can do and the potential when he's on the field is astronomical. But the key there is when he's on the field. And he has remained healthy this entire preseason, this entire training camp, and seemingly figured out the issues. But he's yet to play a full game. He's only had a few snaps, live snaps, really, in a game in preseason a couple times this season. When the season starts and everything's 125% right, will that remain? And that's the question mark. So that's why I just don't have the confidence to put him at number 1 or number 2. If he remains healthy the entire season, yeah, that very well could be the case. But I'm just basically basing this off of what are the odds of that. And Christian Watson I have at 43 receptions, 658 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So getting more yardage and more playing time than last year, but I think it's kind of inevitable at this point that he misses some time. I hope that's not the case. I hope it's a completely healthy season from Christian Watson and we see him go nuclear for 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns. I would love to see it, but just based off of what we've seen through the first 2 seasons, I can't comfortably put him at 1, 2, and even 3 in this case. So I have him as the 4th wide receiver. I just have higher expectations of both Romeo Doubs, Dontayvion Wicks, and Jayden Reed. Now moving to the tight ends. I don't think any of the tight ends are going to have more receiving yards than the top 4 wide receivers. It's just the way the Packers offense rolls. Hey, it could happen. A tight end could definitely crack 800 yards, but it hasn't happened in a long time for the Green Bay Packers, I believe, since Jermichael Finley, which Luke Musgrave does kind of replicate, but I don't know if we see that here in year 2. Musgrave I have at 45 receptions, 505 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and I have Tucker Kraft not that far behind, 475 yards on 40 receptions and 4 touchdowns. I feel like Tucker Kraft is used more at the goal line in terms of a receiving option, so I see him getting 2 more touchdowns than Luke Musgrave. I have 2 touchdowns for Luke Musgrave. I see those as like 25-yard touchdowns on a corner route, right when the Packers get inside of the 30-yard line. Those are the type of plays I see Luke Musgrave scoring on, but if the Packers are running goal line formation on the goal line, I feel like Tucker Kraft is going to be more of a target, so I have him getting more touchdowns. Now to wrap things up, going over the final 2 wide receivers. So I have pretty much all inflated yardage for the top 4 receivers and the top 2 tight ends, because I do believe Jordan Love was going to have an MVP caliber season, so of course he would have more yardage than last season, but I don't have inflated yardage for both Bo Melton and Malik Heath. And my reasoning here was because I said earlier, I believe these guys are going to remain more healthy. Even if Christian Watson gets hurt, I believe Doubs, Wicks, and Reed are going to remain healthy most of this season. Now, that doesn't mean Malik Heath and Bo Melton aren't going to see some snaps, because they are. It's just how many. Bo Melton didn't have a great preseason, didn't have a great training camp, but he obviously made the roster for the first time in his career, and he's going to see some snaps. He is. But I only have him at 130 yards on 11 receptions and 0 touchdowns. Last year, he had 218 yards on 16 receptions and a touchdown. You know, the Packers definitely got banged up at receiver last year, and Bo Melton was actually our first 100-yard wide receiver, which super impressive, but I don't see that repeating this year. I see these first 4 guys getting off hot and just running away with it, where the Packers don't really need Bo Melton and Malik Heath to see a significant amount of snaps. And I also have Malik Heath down here, 70 receiving yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. He's primarily going to be a special teamer. He's a guy you're going to have out there late in the game if you're running the football and you want a blocking wide receiver, where you're not going to be throwing him the ball too much unless you have like 2 or 3 injuries that week and he's the 3rd or 4th wide receiver. In that case, sure, but that's why I have him at 70 yards for 8 receptions. I think that's completely fair for Malik Heath as the wide receiver number 6, and the same goes for Bo Melton as the wide receiver number 5. I just have such high expectations for these first 4 wide receivers that I can't really give the yardage to these 2 guys, because then it would mean Jordan Love has a ridiculous amount of yardage, because even this, all of these numbers right here, the first 6 wide receivers and the first 2 tight ends would total 4,877 yards and 36 touchdowns, which that yardage would have led the NFL last season, and that touchdown amount would have tied Dak Prescott for the most passing touchdowns. And that's not including Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, Emmanuel Wilson, which could total another 300 or so yards, putting Jordan Love at over 5,000 passing yards. I truly do believe that Jordan Love is going to have an MVP caliber season, and maybe it's not 5,000 passing yards and 36 touchdowns. And you can kind of lower these numbers all a tiny, tiny bit, but I do believe it's going to be somewhere near that, where Jordan Love is considered one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL and is in the running for the MVP. And it's all because he's going to progress and these wide receivers are going to progress. And this offense is just going to mesh better week one going into the season, whereas last season, it was a slow start. We had people clamoring for Sean Clifford at quarterback. The Packers even traded one of their starting defenders, Rasul Douglas, midway through the season, not really knowing that they were going to go on that run. So it was a different outlook in 2023 than I believe it's going to be in 2024. They're going to hit the ground running. I believe they're going to win Friday versus the Philadelphia Eagles and start strong here in week one. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments. What is your prediction for the wide receivers? Either just list them 1 through 6. Who do you think will lead in yardage, or write down the yardage, touchdowns if you want to go that far as well. Again, you would have an argument for pretty much any of these guys, unless you put, say, like Malik Heath at number 1. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But you do have an argument. Like if you put Christian Watson at 1 and Reed at 2 and Doubs at 3 and Wicks at 4, like I wouldn't be like, oh, that's definitely not going to happen. It's an argument. It's 100% an argument. You could put any of these guys in any order, and it could definitely happen. But this is the order I have, so let me know what you think of it. Leave a comment down below. Hit the like button if you did enjoy the video. Again, go check out BetUS. Link down in the description. Get a 125% deposit match on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Appreciate you guys watching the video. I'll catch you on the next one, and as always, go Pack Go.